NVIDIA is launching another graphics card today, the RTX 3050. On the plus side, it's supposed to be an entry-level card, or as close to that as GPU manufacturers are willing to get in 2022, with 8 gigs of GDDR6 VRAM and an MSRP of $250 US. On the minus side, the GPU shortage continues, and the real question today is, what will the street price be for the RTX 3050? How much will these actually sell for? Also, I guess, what is the performance like? Today, I can at least answer one of those questions.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by Lexar SSDs and memory kits. If you're looking to upgrade your gaming PC, drop a Lexar NM620 NVMe SSD into your motherboard's M.2 2280 slot. Up to 2 TB capacities are available, and the PCIe Gen 3x4 interface allows for up to 3,300 megabytes per second reads and 3,000 megabytes per second writes. Or try a Lexar Hades RGB DDR4 memory kit, available in 3200 or 3600 speed with XMP 2.0 support, vibrant RGB lighting, and a smooth and stylish design. Controllable by most motherboard RGB software too. For more on Lexar Hades memory or the NM620 SSD, click the sponsor link in the video description. Now this whole video is good, of course, but there are timestamps available if you'd like to jump ahead for the benchmark numbers. I'd like to begin by addressing the current situation with budget gaming graphics cards. There are no budget gaming graphics cards. I mean, there are, but in terms of entry-level options, the market is in short supply. Now, I usually consider the $150-ish range to be entry-level for a discrete GPU, with nice entry to mid-level options starting at around $250 or so, but I'm probably still a bit too attached to a pre-shortage mindset in terms of pricing that we honestly might never return to. To add to the confusion, there are now 4 separate generations or lineups of graphics cards just from NVIDIA alone that compete in the $200 to $400 MSRP price range: the RTX 20 and 30 series, and the GTX 10 and 16 series, which are still available. AMD, meanwhile, has the 6000 series, including the 6500 XT that just launched last week for $200 MSRP, as well as the 5000 series and even the 500 series that has been hanging out since 2017. Now, this is just a short list of some of those GPUs that are available, with MSRP launch pricing and ballpark street pricing as of January 2022. Now, these NVIDIA prices are all inflated by nearly 50% or more, with some like the RTX 3060 going for more than double their list price. Now, AMD isn't doing too much better, although the existence of in-stock Radeon RX 6500 XTs for $270, that's over on Newegg. Look, you can add it to cart and everything. It does mean just a 35% markup for that one. It is the single fan power color. It sure would be nice if this was one of those $200 cards that popped up on launch day. There's still only one of those listed, the Asus model. The rest have all jumped up in price, although this one, again, you can at least add it to cart for now, even though it's the single fan version that seems to be a pretty entry-level variant even of the 6500 XT. For the RTX 3050 though, based on this chart and the current markups, I'm estimating maybe a $400 to $450 street price, which would put it in the same ballpark as the GTX 1660, 1660 Super, and 1660 Ti. That said, I'm going to go over this EVGA XC Black RTX 3050, which EVGA informed us accidentally shipped with the OC VBIOS instead of the stock VBIOS, meaning the boost clock was set to 1845 MHz instead of the default, which should be 1777. So FYI, anyone who is choosing between the OC and non-OC version of this card, you can just flash the non-OC one with the VBIOS from the OC version for a 68 Hz clock speed bump. I already ran my tests with the OC BIOS, so keep in mind we're looking at a 2 to 3% overclock with the RTX 3050 here. The OC version will ship with a backplate though, this one does not. The non-OC EVGA XC Black RTX 3050 is an entry-level card that should list for the $250 MSRP, and it uses the classic EVGA no-frills design. Measuring just shy of 8 inches long, it sports a dual-fan cooler with a single heat pipe configuration, the main difference between it and the RTX 3060's cooler that uses 2 heat pipes. It has a black plastic shroud, no lighting to speak of, and the video outs are standard for this model with 3 display ports and 1 HDMI 2.1. It's a dual slot card and a PCI Express 4.0x8 interface, and total graphics power is 130 watts. NVIDIA recommends a 550 watt power supply for a PC with an RTX 3050, but some overclocked versions might suggest a little bit more than that. And that's pretty much all. Again, no backplate on this card, although it does have a nice flat black PCB. The GPU itself is the Ampere-based GA106, specifically the GA106-150-KA-A1, built with Samsung's 8nm lithography and sporting 2560 shader units, or CUDA. CUDA cores paired with 8GB of GDDR6 VRAM on a 128-bit bus with an effective data rate of 14 gigabits per second. For comparison, I decided to go with more cards for a total of 6 in this roundup, but as a result, I only tested at 1080p. Because time is a factor in getting these videos up on launch day, but I do have NVIDIA's two lowest-end 20 and 30 series cards, the RTX 2060 and RTX 3060, as well as the GTX 1660 Ti. For AMD, I have the newly launched Radeon RX 6500 XT and the RX 6600 that's one step up in the Radeon lineup. Moving on to my test setup. All tests were run on this test system with an MSI Meg X570 Ace motherboard and a Ryzen 9 5900X 12-core CPU running with Auto OC and PBO enabled, cooled by a Corsair H150i Elite LCD 360mm all-in-one cooler. Memory is a 32GB G.Skill Trident Z Neo DDR4 3600 CAS latency 16 kit, meaning the RAM and Infinity Fabric on the system are both running at 1800 MHz. And we're on the latest version of Windows 11 with the latest GPU drivers from AMD and NVIDIA. Again, here are the stats for the rest of the system if you want to take a closer look. Let's move on to performance though, and here are the actual clock speeds I was seeing out of these cards while in use. Do note that the base and boost clocks for most modern GPUs can often be ignored, as real-world measurements always show them running at higher frequencies. Also, frequency is not the sole factor in performance, and despite the Radeon cards hitting impressive peak frequencies of 2700 MHz or more, the NVIDIA cards still regularly outperform them, even though the RTX and GTX cards typically run in the 1800 to 2000 MHz range. The larger and more complex a chip is, the harder it is to maintain stability at high clock speeds, which is why frequencies for mid to low-end GPUs can often go higher than their high-end counterparts. Let's dive into some benchmark numbers next. Starting with 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme, which is a synthetic benchmark from 3D Mark, their DirectX 12 test, and here the RTX 3050's graphics score was 2,867. The RTX 3060 leads it by 41%, the 2060 still tops it by 20%, and even the 1660 Ti is ahead by 2.8%. Fortunately, it still beat out the 6500 XT, which was 19% slower. 3D Mark Port Royal is my other synthetic benchmark from 3D Mark, and it's a ray tracing focused test. The 6500 XT was able to run this test, despite a warning from 3D Mark, but if you wondered what reviews last week meant when they said the 6500 XT has hardware accelerated ray tracing, but it's not much, here it is. 2.4 frames per second, still well behind the 1660 Ti and 86% behind the RTX 3050. Woof. The RX 6600 does better, topping the 3050 by 6%, with the 3060 winning this round 39% in front of the 3050. Do note that if you're comparing the RTX 3050 and the GTX 1660 Ti, which I found to have very similar performance otherwise, the newer 30 series cards' ray tracing cores allow more than double the performance versus the 1660 Ti, and DLSS support as well might push you towards the 3050 if prices are similar. Moving on to some real-world games, we have Resident Evil Village, the 8th installment in the series, running DirectX 12, and we are using the balanced quality preset, and my benchmark run begins with the first descent down into the village itself. At 1080, the RTX 3050 only manages to outpace the 1660 Ti and the 6500 XT, which were 6 and 11% slower respectively, while the RTX 2060 still maintains a 10% lead. The RX 6600 meanwhile comes up with a win over the RTX 3060, hitting 166 frames per second. GTA 5 is next, a game that needs no introduction at this point, and I'm running very high settings for this DirectX 11 title because this game originally launched in frickin' 2013. 2015 for the PC release to be fair, but still, at 1080 we are getting close to the game engine's 187.5 FPS limit, which the NVIDIA 2060 and 3060 cards hit a bit more often than the RX 6600, although they all managed around 150 to 160 frames per second, 8 to 17% ahead of the RTX 3050. The RX 6500 XT was the only card that couldn't push past 100 FPS in this test, down by more than 32% versus the 3050. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is another DirectX 12 title, and at 1080 the RX 6500 XT is down 20% versus the RTX 3050, while the 1660 Ti again edges the newer 30 series card out by about 4 FPS. The 6600 is 29% ahead, the 2060 is 22% in front, and the 3060 wins by 34%. Dirt 5 is next, because I like to include a racing game if I can. Here the RTX 3050 manages about a 5% win over the 1660 Ti and a 20% lead over the 6500 XT, with the remaining cards still ahead. The 2060 wins by 12%, the RX 6600 wins by just under 28%, and the RTX 3060 wins by just over 28%, hitting 132.6 FPS to just just edge out the Radeon card. Doom Eternal is my only Vulkan title, known for its fast-paced gameplay and delightfully crafted demonic violence and gore, although I was running the high preset instead of the nightmare setting that I usually go with for higher-end GPUs, which said it was only using 4 gigs of VRAM, so the 6500 XT could still play. The 6500 XT still tanked with only 66 frames per second on average, more than 60% below the 3050. And if you're wondering, AMD's review guide even suggests using the medium or high preset in this game, so I was within their recommended parameters, and this was still the result. And so it goes. The 1660 Ti, meanwhile, was about 6% behind the 3050 though, with the 2060 in front by 9% and the 3060 up by 35%. Cyberpunk 2077 is running with the medium graphics preset, but even at 1080p, since this is a newer title, overall frame rates were lower. The RX 6500 XT only manages 41.8 FPS, about 44% slower than the RTX 3050. The 1660 Ti still trails by 1.5%, while the 2060 is up 15%. The 6600 is up 20%, and the 3060 wins by 30%. Far Cry 6 is my final test. We're running the medium preset with DXR and Fidelity FX features turned off for comparison purposes, and at 1080p, the RTX 3050 and GTX 1660 Ti are neck and neck at about 99 frames per second. The RX 6600 pulls out a win here with 132.4 FPS on average, 33% ahead of the 3050, with the 2060 in front by 16% and the 3060 out in front by 24.3%. So there are my gaming comparisons, but beyond raw performance, we should also take a quick look at GPU temperatures. Here are the peak and hotspot temperatures recorded for each card across all tests. Lower-end GPUs typically use smaller dies that require less cooling, but solutions still need to be able to keep up with their thermal output. The max temperature for the EVGA RTX 3050 XE Black in the overclocked configuration was 61.8 degrees Celsius with a hotspot temp of 73.2. That's very good for an air-cooled card, especially with a bit of an overclock, and likely there's still some headroom available. None of these cards got much past 70 degrees Celsius during my tests, and while the EVGA RTX 3050 XE Black was just about the coolest here, all cards are well within tolerable temperature ranges while maintaining a nice quiet sound profile. And here are my overall numbers evenly weighted by game, using the RTX 3050 as the 100% baseline. The RX 6600 outperforms the 3050 by about 25% at 1080, while the RTX 3060 leads by closer to 30%. The 1660 Ti is still making a strong appearance, down by less than 2%, while the 6500 XT had the poorest showing and is down by nearly 30%. Here's another chart showing MSRP prices, which would be nice, but I'm mainly including it here for your reference. The 3060 would clearly be the choice out of all these cards if you could buy that card for $330. But as shown on this chart, with street prices, the actual buying landscape is a bit more challenging. I'm estimating a $400 street price for the 3050, which might be a little bit optimistic, but let's see how things play out in the next week or so. The 6500 XT might actually be the most appealing card for some of you, sad as I am to say it, if you can continue buying it for well below $300. The competition there is 16 series cards that are getting quite long in the tooth with varying prices and availability. I still think all these prices are absurd for cards designed for 1080p gaming though, and I recommend holding out for a market change if you can. Right now, GPU manufacturers, retailers, third-party resellers, supply chain middlemen, product managers, and scalpers are taking advantage of this shortage to boost their profits and their bottom line. But maybe, just maybe, a bunch of stuff will change in the coming months and there will be a flood of used cards on the market, and then we should all look to buying those rather than scooping up new inventory from store shelves. As for the RTX 3050, it's a decent card. It should be cheaper, of course, and I think in a sane world, the 6500 XT would have been like $140, and then the 3050 could sit in the $170 to $190 range, kind of like X50 cards have done in the past. But ultimately, I'd rather this card exist than not exist, strange a compliment as that may be, because it is the first bone NVIDIA has thrown even in the general vicinity of the entry-level GPU market in some time. And the performance numbers I showed you today can still be boosted with NVIDIA DLSS in titles that support it, or with AMD's FXR in many other titles. But there you have it, guys. Hopefully you now have a better idea of how the RTX 3050 stacks up performance-wise, and I sincerely hope that there will be ample stock available, and even an improvement to the overall GPU shortage soon. That's all for this video though. Closing reminder to check out my store at paulshardware.net for merch, shirts, pint glasses, other thumbscrew-related items like hoodies, and of course, like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel if you really enjoyed it. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.